moment I stepped inside that house, every instinct in my body told me I had just made a terrible mistake. It wasn't anything obvious at first. Nothing dramatic happened the second the door opened, but something about the place felt wrong. The kind of wrong you can't logically explain, but your gut refuses to ignore. And the worst part is, by the time I realized it, I was already deep inside that house with no easy way out. This happened back in 2018, a few days before my wife's birthday. She had been asking me for a treadmill for years. Not in a demanding way, just casually mentioning it every now and then. She loved running, but hated driving to the gym every day, especially during winter. Every time the topic came up, I'd look online for one, see the price, and immediately close the tab. Good treadmills are ridiculously expensive. At the time, we were living on a pretty tight budget. Rent, bills, groceries, everything added up fast. Spending over $1,000 on exercise equipment just wasn't realistic. So I figured the only reasonable option was buying one used. I spent several nights scrolling through Craigslist listings, comparing prices, reading descriptions, and trying to figure out which ones looked legitimate. Some listings were clearly scams. Others looked like machines that had been sitting in someone's damp basement for 10 years. After a few days of searching, I finally found one that looked promising. The photos showed a treadmill that appeared almost brand new. The price was far lower than most others, but not so low that it seemed suspicious. The seller explained in the description that his wife had wanted it but barely used it, and now they just wanted to clear space. The seller's name was Terrence. I sent him a message asking if it was still available, and within 10 minutes, he replied with his phone number so we could talk about pickup details. Interestingly, we never actually called each other. Everything we discussed happened through text messages. Terrence seemed normal enough. He didn't pressure me to buy it quickly or act strange in any way, just a regular guy trying to get rid of something he no longer needed. The only complication was scheduling. Terrence told me he worked late shifts and usually didn't get home until around 10 p.m. His house was also about a 45-minute drive from where I lived. That meant if I picked it up after work, I wouldn't get home until close to midnight. We kept trying to figure out a better time, but nothing really lined up. Then one evening around 8:30, Terrence texted me. He said he had gotten off work earlier than usual and asked if I could come by that night. My wife's birthday was only a few days away at that point. I still hadn't bought her anything yet, and this treadmill felt like the perfect surprise. So I agreed. I drove over to my brother's place to borrow his pickup truck since my car obviously couldn't carry something that big. Before leaving his house, I quickly searched the address Terrence had sent me just to see what the place looked like. Google Street View showed the road, but strangely, I couldn't actually see any houses on it, just a long stretch of trees. I figured the images were probably outdated and didn't think much more about it. The drive itself wasn't too bad. The closer I got to the location, though, the more rural everything became. Streetlights disappeared. Houses became more spaced out. Eventually, I turned onto the road where Terrence supposedly lived. It was a narrow gravel road winding through dense woods. Every few hundred feet, there were small dirt paths branching off into the trees. They looked like private driveways, but my GPS didn't recognize any of them as actual roads. In fact, the GPS told me I had already reached my destination before I even turned onto the correct path. I had to rely on Terrence's directions from the text messages. After driving nearly a quarter mile down one of those paths, I finally saw the house, and I immediately felt confused. The place was enormous. I'm not exaggerating when I say it looked more like a mansion than a house. A massive brick structure sitting alone in the middle of the woods. Tall white pillars lined the front entrance, and thick vines climbed along parts of the exterior walls. It looked old. Not abandoned, but definitely aged. The kind of house that probably had a long history behind it. It just didn't match what I expected from someone selling a used treadmill online. Still, I parked the truck and walked up to the front door. When I knocked, the sound echoed loudly through the entire house. About a minute later, the door opened. Terrence stood there. He was tall and thin, probably in his early 30s. His hair was a little messy, but otherwise he looked like a normal guy. He greeted me casually and said the treadmill was upstairs in one of the spare bedrooms. Then he stepped aside so I could come in. The inside of the house felt exactly like you'd imagine an old mansion would feel. There was outdated wallpaper on the walls, antique furniture scattered throughout the rooms, and a faint musty smell lingering in the air. Not like the place was abandoned, just old. But something about the atmosphere made me uneasy. Terrence started walking up the staircase, and I followed him. When we reached the second floor, we stepped into a long hallway lined with doors on both sides. There had to be at least 8 or 10 rooms. Some doors were open, others were closed. As we walked toward the end of the hallway, I glanced into a couple of the open rooms out of habit. Then I saw something that immediately made my stomach tighten. In one of the bedrooms, a man was sitting on the edge of the bed. He was facing the doorway and staring directly at me. He didn't blink. He didn't move. Just sat there with this empty expression on his face. The look in his eyes was unsettling, like there was nothing behind them. I quickly looked away and kept walking. Terrence hadn't said anything about another person being there, and he didn't react at all when we passed that room, like it was completely normal. We reached the last room at the end of the hallway. Inside was the treadmill. Nothing else. Terrence gestured toward it and told me I could test it if I wanted. I stepped inside the room, turned the machine on, and let it run for a few seconds just to see if it worked. It seemed perfectly fine. But while I was standing there, I heard something from the hallway. A faint creaking sound, like a door slowly opening. I looked toward the doorway and noticed Terrence staring down the hall with a tense expression. For a moment, his face looked almost angry. Then he noticed me watching him and quickly forced a smile. "So what do you think?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Looks good." He nodded and said he'd go downstairs to grab something to help carry it. Then he walked away. His footsteps faded as he went down the stairs. For a few seconds, everything was quiet. Then I heard footsteps again. But these were different. They were lighter, and coming from the other end of the hallway. At first, they were slow. Then, suddenly, they started running. The sound of someone sprinting straight toward the room I was standing in echoed through the hallway. My heart immediately started pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside the doorway. Whoever it was didn't step inside. They just stood there. I could hear breathing, slow, heavy breathing. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I took a cautious step toward the doorway, then another. Just before I reached it, the person suddenly ran back down the hallway. I caught a quick glimpse of him disappearing into the room where I had seen the other man earlier. The door slammed shut. I stood there frozen for a moment. "What the hell was that?" I muttered. The house suddenly felt much darker than before. I called out Terrence's name. No response. My voice echoed through the hallway and faded into silence. A growing sense of dread settled in my stomach. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Really wrong. I stepped out of the room and started walking toward the staircase. As I reached the top step, Terrence suddenly appeared coming up from the first floor. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. His right hand quickly moved behind his back like he was hiding something. We stared at each other for a few seconds. "Everything okay?" he asked. His voice sounded calm, but his eyes looked nervous. I didn't know what he was hiding behind his back, but I was certain it wasn't something used for moving a treadmill. I needed to get out of that house. "I was just going to grab the cash from my truck," I said. Terrence stared at me silently for a moment, like he was thinking. Then he slowly smiled. "Okay," he said. He stepped aside to let me pass. I walked down the stairs, feeling his eyes on me the entire time. Every second I expected him to grab me from behind. But nothing happened. I reached the front door, stepped outside, and hurried to the truck. The moment I sat down in the driver's seat, something felt wrong. The truck leaned noticeably to one side. Then I realized what had happened. The tires were flat. All of them. Someone had slashed them. My heart started racing again. But I didn't care. I started the truck and drove anyway. The rims scraped against the gravel as I forced the vehicle down the path and out of the neighborhood. I didn't stop until I was miles away. Later, I contacted the police and explained everything. They attempted to question Terrence, but he refused to cooperate. Without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Nothing ever came from it. To this day, I still think about that house sometimes, about the silent man sitting on the bed, about the footsteps running down the hallway, and about what Terrence was hiding behind his back when he saw me trying to leave. I don't know what was really going on inside that mansion, but I'm absolutely certain of one thing. If I had stayed there even a few minutes longer, I might not have made it out alive. If this story gave you chills, make sure to leave a like on the video. It really helps the channel reach more people who love true scary stories. And I'm curious what you think. What do you believe was really happening inside that mansion? Do you think that other man was part of the trap? Or could he have been another victim? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy true horror stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next disturbing story. The man who came to buy my couch barely spoke a single word the entire time he was in my apartment. At first, I just thought he was shy. Looking back now, I realized something much worse was going on. And if my old dog hadn't started scratching at the bedroom door when she did, I probably wouldn't have realized the danger until it was far too late. This happened several years ago when I was living alone in a small apartment while trying to rebuild my life. I had recently gone through a rough breakup and decided it was time for a fresh start. Part of that meant getting rid of a lot of my old furniture and replacing it slowly over time with things that felt new. Since I didn't want to deal with the hassle of selling things through friends or coworkers, I decided to use Craigslist. At the time, Facebook Marketplace was still fairly new, and I honestly didn't even have a Facebook account. Craigslist had always seemed simple enough. Post an item, include a few photos, list the price, and wait for someone to contact you. And honestly, it worked pretty well for the first few items. I sold a desk, a couple chairs, and a coffee table without any problems. Each time someone came by to pick something up, the interaction was quick and normal. That made me feel comfortable continuing to sell the rest of my stuff the same way. The biggest item I still needed to get rid of was my couch. It was a large, heavy piece of furniture that I definitely couldn't move by myself. My car was tiny, and there was no way I could transport something like that, even if I wanted to. So in the listing, I clearly wrote that the buyer would need to pick it up themselves. I figured that would filter out anyone who wasn't serious. About 2 days after posting the ad, I got a message from a guy named Carson. He said he had a pickup truck and would be able to carry the couch without any problem. Over text, he seemed pretty confident and friendly. We agreed that he would come by that evening around 6:30 to pick it up. Since I lived in an apartment complex with about 10 other units in the building, I didn't feel too worried about someone coming over. You needed a key to enter the main door of the building, and there were usually people around coming and going. Still, I made sure to keep things simple. No long conversations, no letting someone wander around the apartment. Just come in, grab the couch, and leave. That was the plan. At around 6:45, my phone rang. It was Carson. He said he was outside the building. Before heading down to let him in, I put my dog Cleo into the bedroom so she wouldn't get in the way. She was an old dog, almost 14 years old at that point, and she mostly spent her days sleeping. Once she was settled, I went downstairs to meet him. The first thing I noticed when Carson walked into the building was how different he looked compared to how he sounded over the phone. Over text, he seemed confident and upbeat. In person, he looked exhausted. He was thin, almost painfully skinny. His hair was messy and hung around his face, and his beard looked like it hadn't been trimmed in months. His clothes were wrinkled and slightly dirty. He barely said anything as we walked up the stairs to my apartment. I tried making some small talk, asking how his day had been and if the drive was far. He just gave short answers like, yeah, or not too bad. It was awkward, but I figured some people just aren't talkative. When we got inside, I pointed toward the couch in the living room. There it is, I said. Carson stepped into the room and stared at the couch silently. At first, I thought he was just inspecting it, but after about 30 seconds of him standing there without saying anything, the silence started to feel uncomfortable. So, do you still want it? I asked. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes felt strangely empty. Then he nodded. But before either of us could say anything else, Cleo suddenly started scratching at the bedroom door down the hallway. That immediately caught my attention. Cleo never scratched at the door like that. She was a quiet dog who mostly slept all day. Hearing her whining and scratching like something was wrong made me worry that maybe she needed to go outside or wasn't feeling well. "Sorry, 1 second," I said. I walked down the hallway and opened the bedroom door. Cleo was standing there wagging her tail, but she also seemed a little restless. She let out a soft whine as I crouched down to pet her. "Hey girl, what's going on?" I said quietly. After a few seconds, she seemed fine, so I gently guided her back into the room and closed the door again. The entire thing probably took 20 seconds. When I walked back into the living room, Carson was gone. At first, I thought maybe he had stepped into the hallway or something. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I checked the kitchen. Nothing. Then I stepped into the hallway and looked toward the stairwell. Still nothing. It honestly looked like he had just walked out of the apartment entirely without saying a word. I stood there confused for a moment before pulling out my phone and calling him. The call went straight to voicemail. I sent a quick text asking if he was still interested in the couch. No reply. Eventually, I just shrugged it off. Sure, it was weird, but maybe he changed his mind or had something come up. I went back into the bedroom and spent the rest of the evening watching TV with Cleo lying beside me on the bed. A few hours passed without me thinking much about the situation. By around 11 p.m., I decided to take Cleo outside before going to bed. It was the middle of December, and the weather was freezing. Whenever I took her out at night, I usually layered up before stepping outside. I was wearing a pair of thin sweatpants inside the apartment, but I kept a thicker pair of snow pants near the bed for when I needed to go outside. As I grabbed them, I took my phone out of my pocket and tossed it onto the bed so it wouldn't feel uncomfortable in my pocket under both layers. Then I put on my jacket, grabbed Cleo's leash, and headed outside. We walked around the back of the apartment complex for a couple minutes while she did her business. That's when I realized I had forgotten my phone. I remembered tossing it on the bed and completely forgetting to put it back in my pocket. For a second, I thought about going back to grab it, but we were only outside for a few minutes anyway, so I didn't bother. Once Cleo finished, we headed back upstairs. I unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. Everything looked normal. I took off my jacket and walked into the bedroom to grab my phone. But when I looked at the bed, it wasn't there. I froze. I clearly remembered tossing it onto the mattress. I checked under the blanket. Nothing. Then I checked my pockets again just to be sure. Still nothing. And that's when the realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Carson. He never left. The moment that thought entered my mind, my entire body went cold. I slowly walked toward the bedroom door and leaned my head slightly past the frame so I could see down the hallway. And that's when I saw him. Carson was standing right in the middle of the hallway. He was staring directly at me, completely silent, the same empty expression on his face. For a moment, neither of us moved. "Carson, what are you doing here?" I asked. My voice sounded shaky. He didn't respond. He just stood there. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. "Have you been here this whole time?" I asked again. Still nothing. That blank stare never changed. Fear quickly turned into anger. The idea that this guy had been hiding somewhere inside my apartment for hours made blood boil. Before I could even think it through, adrenaline took over. I gently pushed Cleo behind me and stepped into the hallway. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I shouted. Carson didn't move. That only made me more furious. I charged toward him. He seemed completely caught off guard when I grabbed him and shoved him against the wall. My fist connected with his shoulder as he tried to pull away. During the struggle, something fell out of his hand and hit the floor. My phone. I immediately grabbed it. Carson tried to run toward the front door, but I blocked him and pushed him back again. My hands were shaking as I dialed 911. The operator answered, and I quickly explained that there was an intruder in my apartment. Carson still didn't say a single word. Not during the fight. Not while we waited for the police. He just stood there silently, like some kind of lifeless statue. It took about 10 minutes for officers to arrive. They arrested him for trespassing and breaking into the apartment. Apparently, he had hidden somewhere inside after I went to check on Cleo earlier. Maybe in the bathroom or the kitchen. There was no clear explanation. The scariest part was realizing what could have happened if Cleo and I had gone to sleep without noticing anything. He had already taken my phone. If he had planned something worse, I would have had no way to call for help. In the end, Carson didn't receive a serious sentence. Since he hadn't physically harmed anyone, the charges weren't as severe as I hoped they would be. He was released on bond the next day. But the experience changed the way I think about strangers forever. Because the truth is, the most terrifying part of that night wasn't the fight. It was the realization that someone had been hiding inside my apartment the entire evening, watching, waiting, and I had absolutely no idea. If that story made your heart race, take a second to leave a like on the video. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more true scary stories like this. Also, I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think that guy was planning while hiding inside the apartment? Do you think he froze up? Or was he waiting for the right moment? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy listening to real disturbing encounters and true horror stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the final story coming up next. I realized I had walked straight into a trap the moment the man stepped out of that truck and smiled at me. Not a normal smile. It was the kind of smile someone makes when they know they've already won. And in that moment, standing alone in that dark gas station parking lot, I understood that I had made a huge mistake agreeing to meet there. This happened a few years ago when I was preparing for a long-distance move. I had accepted a new job in another state, and since the company only gave me a couple weeks to relocate, I had to get rid of a lot of my belongings quickly. Most of the bigger things had already been sold or donated, but there were still a few items left around my apartment that I didn't want to throw away if someone else could use them. One of those things was a large full-length mirror. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was still in good condition, and I figured someone might want it. Instead of tossing it in the trash, I listed it online for a small price. At that point, I had already sold several things using Craigslist and hadn't experienced any problems. I was careful about who I met and where we met. Being a younger woman living alone meant I always tried to think ahead about safety. I never gave buyers my home address. I never went to their houses. Every single time I sold something, I arranged to meet in a public place. Usually a grocery store parking lot or somewhere with plenty of people around. For weeks, that system worked perfectly. Then, one Wednesday evening after work, I got a message from someone interested in the mirror. He said his name was Ethan. According to his message, he lived about an hour away, but was willing to meet halfway so neither of us had to drive too far. That seemed reasonable to me. He suggested a gas station located about 30 minutes from where I lived. I looked up the location on my phone. On the map, it appeared to be a regular gas station right off a highway. It didn't look suspicious at all. Since I had already driven farther than that for previous sales, I agreed to meet him there. We exchanged a few more texts confirming the time, and then I headed home after work to grab the mirror. By the time I left my apartment, the sun had already gone down. It was one of those winter evenings where darkness comes much earlier than you expect. The drive itself was quiet. The farther I went, the less traffic there seemed to be. Eventually, the road became long stretches of empty highway surrounded by open fields and scattered trees. About 30 minutes later, I pulled into the gas station parking lot, and almost immediately something felt off. The place was completely empty. No cars, no people. Even the lights inside the small convenience store looked dim. I sat in my car for a moment, scanning the area, wondering if maybe I had arrived too early. I checked the time on my phone and saw that I was actually right on schedule. Still, the silence around the gas station made me uneasy. Usually places like that have at least a few customers filling up their tanks or grabbing snacks. But here, there was nothing. The road nearby was quiet too. No passing cars, no headlights in the distance. For a moment, I thought about leaving, but then I remembered that Ethan had already been driving 30 minutes from the other direction. It would feel rude to cancel after both of us had made the trip. So I stayed. I stepped out of my car and leaned against the door, trying to stay alert while I waited. After a few minutes, I finally saw headlights approaching from the road. A red pickup truck turned into the gas station lot and slowly drove toward me. The windows were heavily tinted, which made it impossible to see who was inside. The truck parked in the space next to mine, but the driver didn't get out right away. Instead, the engine idled while the person inside sat there for nearly 30 seconds. I remember feeling nervous during that moment. Something about the situation didn't feel normal. Finally, the driver's door opened. The man stepped out, and the second I saw his face, my entire body went cold. I knew him. His name wasn't Ethan. His name was John. 2 months earlier, I had gone on a dinner date with him after matching on a dating app. At first, he seemed like a normal guy, friendly, polite, and easy to talk to through messages. But the moment we met in person, something felt wrong. During dinner, he kept ordering drinks for me even after I told him I didn't want more. Every time I tried to refuse, he would act disappointed or try to convince me to have just one more. It wasn't aggressive exactly, but it felt manipulative. The whole thing made me uncomfortable. After about 40 minutes, I decided I'd had enough. I told him I needed to leave, but instead of letting me go easily, he kept insisting that I couldn't drive because I had been drinking. The problem with that argument was that I hadn't driven there. I had taken a ride from a friend. Eventually, I excused myself to the restroom, ordered an Uber on my phone, and slipped out of the restaurant as soon as the car arrived. After that night, I blocked his number and completely cut off contact. I thought that was the end of it. But now, 2 months later, he was standing in front of me in a dark gas station parking lot. He slowly walked around the front of his truck toward my car, and he was smiling. That same unsettling smile. The realization hit me instantly. He had created a fake identity online just to lure me out here. I didn't wait another second. I jumped into my car and slammed the door shut. As I reached for the lock button, John grabbed the handle and tried to pull it open. "Hey," he said calmly, repeating my name over and over like we were old friends catching up. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. The moment the car came to life, I threw it into reverse. John's expression changed instantly. The smile disappeared, replaced by pure anger. As my car began backing up, he suddenly raised his arm and slammed something against the side window. The glass shattered instantly. For a split second, I saw what looked like a knife in his hand. I didn't stop to think. I slammed the gas pedal and sped out of the parking lot as fast as I could. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely breathe. I drove several miles down the highway before finally pulling over to call the police. When officers arrived at the gas station later, John was already gone. And the worst part was that they had no way to track him. The number he used to contact me as Ethan turned out to be a prepaid phone. The number I had originally blocked from the dating app was also untraceable. Whoever he really was, he had made sure there was no easy way to find him. The thought that scared me the most afterward was realizing how long he might have been watching me. 2 months had passed since that dinner. How did he know I was selling things online? How did he know where to contact me? The idea that he might have been quietly following my life during that entire time still makes my skin crawl. Thankfully, I moved across the country not long after that incident. I never heard from him again, but sometimes I still think about that night. About how calm he looked while walking toward my car. About how carefully he planned the entire situation. And about what might have happened if I had been just a few seconds slower getting into my car. Because I'm absolutely certain that meeting at that empty gas station was never about buying a mirror. It was about making sure no one else would be around to see what he planned to do next. If you enjoyed listening to these true scary stories, make sure to leave a like on the video. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you more disturbing stories like these. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. Which story disturbed you the most and why? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoy true horror stories, creepy encounters, and real-life disturbing experiences, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And stay updated with more stories like this.